is freedom is not free. Freedom is not free. The key verse, Revelation 14:12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and what?
Faith.
And the faith of Jesus. Let us pray. Father in heaven, may we be faithful till the end. There's many distractions in this world, many tribulations, many difficult times, temptations, but help us to, as the remnants, to keep the commandments of God and have the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus Christ. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I don't know how many of you noticed this brand. Of course, I'm not promoting this brand, don't get me wrong. This is called Gongcha. It's a tea kind of brand. It started in Taiwan in 2006. In Korea, 2012, launched 2012, and it's famous for bubble tea or some other teas. I don't know. And I hear that it's doing better than Taiwan in Korea. Gongcha. About 6-7 years ago, when Junyoung was in kindergarten, we were passing by the street and we saw this shop. And Junyoung, as he was learning to read Korean and English, he stopped and he read the sign. Gongcha. And this is what he said. Dad, it says Gongcha. Gongcha in Korean, it means free in English. Dad, it says Gongcha. It must be free. Let's go in. Well, this little kid, as he was learning how to read and learning about money, he found out the hard way that nothing in this world is Gongcha. Gongcha is not Gongcha. Difficult times. He wanted to go in, but we couldn't. Next Friday is a very historical day for this nation. What is it? It's March 1st. We always take it for granted that it is a holiday. You don't go to school. It's the March 1st movement. It's called 3.1 Independence Movement. Exactly 100 years ago, 1919, March 1st, in this nation, so many people gathered together in Seoul. Demonstrations against Japan and the government. It started in Seoul, but it spread like wildfire nationwide. 100 years. And starting March 1st, that has made who we are and what this nation is. And it says in this poster, another 100 years after this March 1st. So many people were captured, tortured, killed during this time, 100 years ago, 1919, March 1st. Freedom is not free. How many of you know where this is? Anyone? Maybe Brian's been there. This is in Washington, D.C. Anyone? This is a Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. And this is not just any pool, but pool of remembrance. And let me try to get this here. All right. Right here, in this pool of remembrance, there are some words that is written. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe we'll zoom in. What does it say?
Freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom is not,
Free.
you can't really see it. It says freedom is not free. Freedom is not free. During the Korean War, 54,246 US soldiers died. 628,000 United Nations soldiers died. Wounded, over 1 million soldiers wounded. Captured, 92,970 soldiers captured. Missing, over 470,000 soldiers missing during this Korean War. Freedom is not free. Freedom is not free. There needs to be some kind of a ransom or a price to gain something in this world. How about religious liberty? We go on. You know, the Adventist Church is very serious about religious liberty and freedom. As you know, our denomination is probably one of the denominations in the front line in various organizations fighting and supporting for religious liberty and freedom. General Conference GC has a department called Public Affairs and Religious Liberty, PARL. Each union conferences and conferences, they have this department. Even local churches, that's how serious we are. Even local churches have departments called Religious Liberty. Well, we take it so seriously that every third January of each year, the Worldwide Adventist Church commemorate that Sabbath for Religious Liberty Sabbath, but we're a little late because of winter break. And today we have set the Sabbath as Religious Liberty Sabbath. It is a Sabbath that we remember and commemorate this important topic, this important philosophy of faith. Also to remember millions of people who are still struggling, being tortured, imprisoned in some countries still because of their faith and when they listen to their conscience. I know that some in our audience, in our congregation, in our church, some have spent quite some time, length in years, in prison for keeping their faith and listening to their conscience and to the Holy Spirit. How about our world today? I love to see this, show this, and also explain about this to in the missiology class. This is called a 1040 window. You've probably seen it before. It's a 10 degrees to 40 degrees north latitude in the map. 1040 window. And this is very important missiologically. It is one of the most significant, also a very strategic mission place in the map. And there's some reasons for that. 2/3 of the world population lives in this region. 2/3. Also, 90% of the poorest of the poor in the world live in 1040 window. 90%. There's more statistics. About 4.65 billion people, 2/3 of the population here, 90% of the world's poorest. 95 of these people are unevangelized. 95%. We live in a country where we say, 25% are Christians. More than 95% of these people are unevangelized. Also, one of the three major religions excluding Christianity, what is it? Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, they all were birthed right here in this region, 1040 window. Also, each year there's a survey and statistics that comes out that shows which countries persecute Christianity and Christians. And out of top 50 persecuting countries, 45 of them are in this 1040 window. 45 of them. You see right here, color red is extreme persecution. You see Nigeria, Sudan, Somalia, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and if you go right here, right above us, North Korea. Red is hostile. And you see number 1, North Korea. And the list goes on. Out of these 50 countries, 45 are in this 1040 window. Worldwide religious liberty. How about in Korea? What's going on? We say 25% are Christians, but what is going on in our country? Recently, a couple of weeks ago, there has been a historical event that's related to religious liberty in Korea. It was also an Adventist review online. Korea's Supreme Court gives historical legal victory to Adventist student. Amen? And I would like to invite our religious liberty director, Juhyun, up to the front. She's also a lawyer, and she will share with us about religious liberties in Korea and what is going on and what's happening.
So religious liberties is a very sensitive topic to talk about in Korea with regard to Korea. So right now we spoke about countries where the level of persecution is very severe, like Pakistan, Nigeria, North Korea. In Korea, I would say the situation is more what we say a slow burn or death by 1,000 cuts. So I don't know if you've heard this phrase before, but death by 1,000 cuts is a phrase that was first used in psychology and sociology by a man named Jared Diamond in his book called Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. And in this book he was talking about his research concerning the Easter Islands. I'm sure you've seen pictures before of the stone hedges, these massive, very advanced civilization that one day suddenly disappeared without a trace, except for these statues. And he was saying how the destruction probably came not by catastrophic event, because we still have all the cultural artifacts showing that it wasn't something like a natural disaster that happened, but it was more of a man-made disaster. Probably the depletion of resources as the islanders used up all the resources on their island that were necessary to survive. It happened very gradually over time, but one day they cut down the last tree and there was no longer any means for them to survive. So in Korea, so the Adventist Church in Korea, we have a very long history of resistance to efforts to impede our observance and our practice of certain religious beliefs. So especially in our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, there was a lot of difficulty, a lot of persecution. And in schools, most schools had a 6-day, school week, at work, most tests on Sabbath, all interviews on Sabbath. So that was a very difficult situation for a lot of Adventists. And that has gone on for many generations. And when our parents and our grandparents first started in the faith, they were burning with desire to serve God. They were newly enraptured with their induction into the faith. So they gave up a lot of things, a lot of career opportunities, just a lot of things that one would think would make you successful in life, in this life. But I go to Pastor Leyland's sermon, departing sermon, from a few Sabbaths ago, when he was talking about how the greatest challenge in the Adventist church is really that Jesus hasn't come. So, if you know about Adventist history, we all know about the great disappointment and how all the believers were ready to put down everything to prepare for Christ's coming. So, they quit their jobs, they were just home praying, trying to subsist on whatever they could grow on their own farms. But Jesus didn't come. And in Korea, after many, many decades of there not being more opportunities for Adventists to participate in the workplace and in academic circles, in society, I think there has been a lot of attrition in how seriously we're able to hold on to our belief that we should be faithful to God's law. And the Sabbath especially, it's not just the Sabbath, there are many other aspects of our society that attack our faith, but the Sabbath has been a special stumbling block. So this is a slide. Last year, the Religious Liberty Department held an event on religious liberties, and during Sabbath school, we used a slide to show some of the areas where tests and interviews are taking place on the Sabbath. So this is just a small subset of jobs and opportunities, academic positions, where the tests and the interviews are on Sabbath and on no other day, so that many people, many young Adventists have given up the opportunity to participate in these sectors. And just thinking about preparing for this message, it made me recall, so this quarter we're of course studying Revelation, and often when we're talking about the last days, we say, oh, we're in the age of Laodicea, we're lukewarm, we need to wake up, and that's all true. But I was thinking that there are messages for all of us in applicability of in all the churches, not just Laodicea. So in Ephesus, we know how Christ says, "You left your first love." Smyrna, Christ is saying, you will suffer, but don't worry. Pergamum, that church that after coming out of persecution, it was no longer possible for them to stand firm, and there was a lot of compromise. So throughout all these churches, the ages, Christians have always faced this problem of their lifestyle and their beliefs being different from the world. And it's not new to us, but as a church, as a people who are living in the last days and preparing for Jesus' coming, I think this is a message that is especially important for us. So just to talk briefly about what the state of the law was before this Supreme Court decision. So the Korean Constitution provides for freedom of religion and provides that all citizens shall be equal before the law, and there shall be no discrimination in political, economic, social, or cultural life because of religion, among others. And coming out of the Second World War, all the countries in the world got together. They came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which talks about freedom of religion, among others, as a very important value and a human right to be enjoyed by all humans. And similar language is found in other international covenants as well. So in Korea, the Constitution provides for freedom of religion, and also we're part of the international covenants, treaties that provide for human rights, religious freedom as a human right. But before, especially when it comes to not doing secular activities on the Sabbath, the protections were very limited. So this is a case from 2011, which concerned judicial qualification exam, so the exam that you have to take in order to become a lawyer, that was administered on Sunday. And Sunday-keeping Christians filed a constitutional complaint with the Constitutional Court saying that their rights were violated by the government because they decided to hold this exam on the Sabbath, and their petition was unsuccessful. And if you look at the parts highlighted that are bolded, it says, this measure was for the convenience of the majority of citizens and necessary restriction of public welfare. So basically, if it's inconvenient for the majority, it really doesn't matter, and it's not really a very serious infringement of your right, even if you can't take the exam. A very similar case in 2010. This time around, it was the same exam, judicial qualification exam, and this petition was filed by a Seventh-day Adventist, so almost 10 years later. And the Constitutional Court rendered almost the exact same decision, saying that, again, these rights can be restricted when necessary to maintain law and order or for public welfare, and to promote the convenience of multiple test takers. And given the state of the jurisprudence, it was very easy and convenient for the government or for any other body to reject requests to receive accommodation for tests that were being held on Sunday or Sabbath. So, for example, so now I'm talking about means to enforce your rights. You would normally think that the Constitutional Court would be somewhere you would go to in order to get your rights recognized. That was unsuccessful. One other means that we tried was administrative appeal. So this is not really a court process, but it is a very court-like process. And it was thought maybe this could be the answer because these tend to be more equities-based, not strictly law-based. The people who are rendering the decisions have more leeway in how much broadly they can construe rights. So this was one more avenue that Adventists were trying. And in one of these cases, so this case involved, I think some of you might be familiar with a case where the medical qualification exam was suddenly switched to Sabbath, whereas it had been taking place on the weekday in past years. So suddenly there was this change. And this was really, concerning to the test takers because this was really sudden. Like they had no opportunity, they didn't see this coming. So because the test had taken place on another day during previous years, we thought we had a pretty strong case that the administrative convenience excuse would not be availing on the state's part. But that was not the case. So even in this administrative appeal, they were saying the ease with which the testing location and exam drafters and proctors can be procured, this warrants the test being administered on Saturday. Government agencies. There are various government agencies that administer various qualification exams, certification exams. And some of them, sometimes when we talk to government officials, they're quite apologetic or understanding, even if they can't grant the request. And some of them are very firm, they're very hardliners and very antagonistic to any request to receive or have the test scheduled for another day. So for example, with the medical qualification exam, the testing body, the administrative agency, was very firm. They were saying, no way, from now on, we're going to always have this test on Saturday. There's never going to be an exception. God did turn that situation around eventually, but for a while, it seemed very bleak. The National Human Rights Commission is sort of a UN mandated body that's in all of the countries in the world to monitor the government and to make sure that the government or other parties are not infringing on fundamental human rights. So this was one other avenue that we tried. And the it was a very disappointing response we got from the National Human Rights Commission. They said many things, but one of the things I was really concerning was that the fact that there is no agreement whatsoever in Korean society on the acceptableness of alternative testing arrangements makes it difficult to see this as a right. And by the nature of a human right or minority protection, whether or not a majority of people think something should be irrelevant to whether or not the right is recognized, but this was what we got from the Human Rights Commission. And then finally, as a last resort, you might think, human relationships, maybe your professors will be willing to accommodate, but in the case that Pastor just spoke to you about right now, the professors themselves were very hesitant or unwilling to grant the accommodations. So they were leaving everything up to the school and not exercising their discretion on behalf of the student. Finally, we did try appealing to the UN, and we never got a formal response back. We did hear that our church senior officials met with UN representatives, and they were saying, this is a very small case. It involves, 3 or 4 people, one single exam. We don't think this is something that might be worth looking into and causing conflict. So it was a very bad situation all around. And in Korea, we have an expression called using an egg to hit a rock. So when you throw an egg at a rock, what would you expect to happen? Probably not very successful in cracking the rock, right? So it's used to refer to cases where you would think something is impossible and futile. And some of us were discussing how it is a very bad situation where we're trying to use an egg to hit a rock and crack open a rock. But one thing was that he felt like there weren't enough eggs being thrown at the rock. So some of you who've been keeping up with the news in Korea might know that a while ago, the Supreme Court in Korea, so ours was a very small, not widely publicized decision, but in Korea there was a very large, very well-known decision a while back on Jehovah's Witnesses and their right to to avoid taking up arms as part of their religious service, their military service, a conscientious objection to serving military duties. And the thing that, even before this decision came up, there were several lower court decisions. So the lower court decisions were split, meaning that one high court or one panel might rule in favor of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and then another might rule in against. So there were various different decisions out there. And because people were becoming very familiar with this issue, we felt like there was a sea change that was happening. So now the grounds were being set so that the Supreme Court might actually begin to take this issue seriously. And what made, we thought would be good were if we had that. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, this is not something that happened overnight. There's still a lot of resistance in Korean society about conscientious objection. But these people have been litigating and filing complaints, filing petitions to the UN for many decades. So it's been a very long time in the making. Many eggs thrown at the rock, basically. And eventually that led to that change. And so we were saying, now but we don't have people who are willing to, get thrown. And even if we want to challenge this in court, there's nobody who wants to participate because that really means closing a lot of doors and maybe just losing your chances because you're antagonizing the administrator or the official, whatever. So this recent case involved a medical student. His name is Juhyun, and so it was a usual pattern. He went to his professors, tried to get his exam dates changed from a date from Sabbath to a date other than Sabbath. The school refused, and then he decided to sue the school, and that was a very difficult decision on his part, no doubt, because it really does close doors, and you're fighting against the school in a court of law. So that was very difficult, and given all the state of the law that I just discussed, it seemed like almost a futile case. But Juhyun decided to sue the school. And at the trial court level, he was unsuccessful, and that was unsurprising because they were basically, the court had a lot of language to cite from precedents, from various administrative bodies, indicating that there really is no reason for a school to provide accommodation for religious beliefs. And when Juhyun was deciding whether or not to appeal, it was also a very difficult decision. Lawyers' fees are very expensive, so nobody is doing this for free. You have to pay them. It would be another 1 year, 2 years before the decision came out, many months. He couldn't just move on. And there was also concern from others around him that this might, it seems like a really weak case, and if we lose here, then it will set an even worse precedent, and it'll become even harder for Adventists in schools to receive religious accommodation. So it was a very difficult decision that required a lot of prayer. But the High Court ruled in Juhyun's favor. And if you have a chance to look at court decisions, precedents, usually these cases are pretty brief. So especially if you don't want to get into something thorny, the judges want to avoid saying too much about a case. Usually the decision will be very brief. The judges won't address all the arguments that you made. It'll be if at all, it'll be in a very cursory fashion. But Juhyun's decision was 29 pages long. And in that decision, it was very detailed. It went into the relevant law, the relevant statutes governing schools very deeply, and also it described the facts in great detail. And one part of that decision was devoted to the issue of whether or not this was really an unrealistic expectation for a school to be able to provide accommodation to students. And in that decision, in that section of the decision, it cited a lot of other medical school and dental school students who had received the accommodation. So this one is on someone who went to Seoul University, National University Medical School, 2 different students who were able to take tests on a different date based on their highest grade being limited to B+. And another who was able to take his exams in sequestration. So during the day, on Sabbath, when others were taking the test, he would be in a little room by himself. And then after sundown, you'd be able to take the test. So many cases like this. And all of these cases all the testimony, all the evidence for these cases were submitted by the students who actually went through this process before. And these were students who really didn't have a lot of support around them. So at the time that they were fighting these battles, if you hear their personal stories, it was really a difficult experience. Seldom would a professor willingly provide this accommodation for the student. There were lots of battles fought, multiple visits to professors. Sometimes the fellow students would help out. Sometimes fellow students would be resistant. Lots of difficulties to overcome. And reading this, I realized that we've been throwing eggs at this frog. It's not just the first shot for us. There were these students who came before who were faithful, even though it was very uncharted territory for them. And God was able to use their efforts to bring about a court decision. And this is a really big deal because now it is the law of the land, now that the Supreme Court has dismissed the school's appeal. So it is a very big deal for us. And because of these individual battles that were fought, these were what made this possible. So just to wrap up, of course prayers are still needed. So Jiman is going back to his school, and he'll be taking all of his exams at once in March. So a lot of wisdom needed in order to prepare for that. And then of course when he goes back to the school there might be some hostility from school officials, so lots of prayers needed. We also need to pray for our young people, because it's really easier said than done when we talk about standing up for your religious liberty, especially in Korea, where there are still so many doors that remain closed. Even within schools, we do have this decision, but enforcing court decisions is always very tricky and very hard. A school might try to distinguish their case from what was inside the decision. They might just disobey outright, and there is sometimes little that you can do to force them to obey. And going to a court, litigating against the school again, can be very costly. So a lot of prayer is needed. And this recent decision concerned just the school tests, and there are many other areas where the battles remain. And then for the Korean church at large, I was talking about death by 1,000 cuts, and all of our individual respective positions with regard to Sabbath or other issues of religious doctrine and practice will vary, but sometimes one might think that a collective exhaustion takes place when there have been so many years of this issue not being taken care of, so many Adventists who are economically and socially disadvantaged because they were unable to compromise on their beliefs. So just, and even with this decision, it provides an excellent opportunity for us to reevaluate, revisit this issue, think again about what God is willing to do for us when we trust Him. But still, old habits die hard, and many years of this exhaustion and almost hopelessness, those things can be very difficult to shred. So I would ask your prayers on behalf of the Korean Church. Also for the non-SDAs, so any sort of, preferential or even accommodation for religious reasons generally excites a very hostile reaction among non-Christians, among the people who aren't granted this sort of accommodation. So we need to pray that the rights that were granted to us will serve as an opportunity for us to witness and not close the hearts of the people who come into contact with this information. And then of course we also need to continue to pray for the brothers and sisters in other countries who are facing much larger persecution on their religious liberties.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Juhyun, for sharing that message and what is going on in Korea now. I have 7 pages of my sermon, and we are in page 1 right now. So we'll have to divide the sermon and continue on next week, next Sabbath. But how about liberty in the Bible? That was actually what was prepared after. Liberty in the Bible. And let me just briefly just touch on the introduction of the sermon, and then we will continue next Sabbath. It's always safe. It is always good to go back to Jesus. Amen?
Amen.
To see what He did and what He said and why He did it. And then we can go back to Luke chapter 4 verses 18 and 19. As Jesus opened up the scrolls of the Old Testament and He shared why He was here and His commission on this earth. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed. The commission and why Jesus came to this earth. We go on, we can see in John chapter 8 verses 32, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Amen.
4 verses later, 36, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed.
Amen.
Galatians 5:1, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free. And do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. You know, Jesus came to give us liberty, to give us freedom. Freedom from sin, from the condemnation of sin. Freedom from sin, and also ultimately freedom from liberty from the sinful world. That was His commission and His mission. But it doesn't stop there. It's not just the life of Jesus that we find freedom and liberty. The book that I hold in my hands, this book, the Bible, the whole book revolves around the theme of liberation. And we will continue this next week, next Sabbath, about how this book is started in heaven, the Garden of Eden, Old Testament, New Testament, even for us today. How it all revolves around the theme liberation. We will continue on that topic next Sabbath. Also, I would like to especially ask for your prayers for the Religious Liberty Department, Juhyun, as she is in the front line, also in sharing these messages. Also, I remember last year we signed a petition for various religious liberty as well. So it is very important throughout the last days. I know we will be in great tribulation. We will be in courts answering about our faith. So it is a very important, sensitive and important topic in the 21st century. So I ask for your prayers. Also, let us be ready. Let us be ready to answer about our religious beliefs and our faith.
Amen.
Let's all stand as we close this morning. Let's all stand for prayer. Father in heaven, we firmly believe that we live in the last days. There will be tribulation, there will be temptations, difficult times to keep our faith. But help us to remember that passage, Revelation 14:12. Those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus.
Amen.
May we be faithful till the end.
Amen.
Thank you for liberating us from the influence, from sin, and the power of sin, and ultimately from the sinful world. We dream and hope for that day. Until then, help us to be faithful to you and you only. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.